We all know Victoria Falls and sweeping savannas, but Zimbabwe also hides stone cities, from the ruined towers of Great Zimbabwe to Chimanimani's granite spines. This land joins ancient kings, colonial scars, and daring wildlife recoveries, like rhinos reborn in Malilangwe. I'll show you wild waterfalls, forgotten stone cities, and reveal oddities such as Victoria Falls' spray, visible from over 50 kilometers away. Chimanimani Mountains cradle one of Earth's smallest but richest alpine moorlands, where ancient quartzite peaks host dozens of plant species found nowhere else. Do you know the Chimanimani Massif supports the rare rock-loving protea and insectivorous plants that survive in mist-washed gorge species? Rugged ridgelines rise like the spine of an old continent, carved by time into serrated summits and hidden valleys. Waterfalls tumble through pockets of rainforest, feeding clear mountain streams that tumble toward Mozambique and eventually into the Save River. Hikers who tackle the iconic Bridal Veil Falls and the steep path to Mount Binga are rewarded with views where Zimbabwe and Mozambique blur into a sea of green. The mountains are a living bridge between the eastern highlands, linking Chimanimani to Nyanga's granite domes and the misty Vumba uplands beyond. Local Shona and Indau communities have long read the landscape like a map, naming ridges and pools after ancestral stories and seasonal hunting grounds. Their knowledge helps scientists locate microhabitats where endemic butterflies and amphibians cling to survival on fragmented cliff ledges. Conservation groups now patrol the highlands to protect rare species and to restore fire-scarred slopes that were once stable under traditional land management. Eco-guides lead small groups along braided trails, teaching visitors how each fern, lichen, and orchid signals the health of the whole ecosystem. In the rainy season, the mountains explode with orchids and proteas, and mist drifts down to meet valley farms that grow tea and highland vegetables. From these cultivated terraces, the landscape folds back into wildness, a reminder that people and nature have always shared this fragile frontier. For travelers seeking quiet, Chimanimani offers nights under a velvet canopy, where southern constellations wheel over silhouette peaks. Each sunrise paints the quartzite faces honey gold, revealing why this corner of Zimbabwe feels both ancient and urgently alive. Victoria Falls forms the world's largest curtain of falling water, spanning more than 1,700 meters as the Zambezi plunges into a chain of basalt gorges. Do you know Victoria Falls is also called Mosi Oatunya, the smoke that thunders, and creates its own mist-fed rainforest that harbors species found nowhere else on the plateau. The roar is so constant, it alters the behavior of surrounding wildlife and has been used for centuries as a natural landmark by river peoples. Underneath that roar, the river's power carved the Batoka Gorge, a jagged canyon that channels the Zambezi and powers adrenaline sports downstream. On the edge of the falls, Livingston Island offers an impossible vantage point where, in the dry season, adventurous visitors can step into Devil's Pool at the lip of the precipice. When water levels rise, the falls widen into an almost seamless wall of white, and the spray can be seen drifting for kilometers across the plateau. That perpetual mist feeds a curious strip of rainforest, teeming with ferns, orchids, and endemic insect species that vanish beyond the spray's reach. Downstream, the same river that creates the falls stitches together national parks, riverine forests, and archaeological sites, linking Victoria Falls to places like Zambezi National Park and farther to Mana Pools. The colonial name commemorates a British monarch, but local songs and ceremonies still honor Mosi Oatunya and the spirits believed to live within its thunder. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its geological, ecological, and cultural values, Victoria Falls sits at the center of cross-border conversations with Zambia. Modern pressures, tourism, proposed hydro projects, and climate variability threaten the delicate balance that keeps the mist forest alive. Yet pockets of traditional knowledge persist, and local guides lead visitors to hidden viewpoints, secret pools, and ancestral sites few outsiders ever see. At night, when the moon is full, the spray becomes a stage for pale rainbows, moonbows that have inspired folklore and quiet pilgrimage for generations. Stay with us, and you'll discover the hidden caves, the narrow island tracks, and the untold stories of people who live both with and because of Victoria Falls. Salisbury Kopje crowns Harare as an ancient granite inselberg, a micro-ecosystem etched over billions of years that concentrates rare plants and history. Do you know Salisbury Kopje's rocky shelters and exposed bedrock hold evidence of prehistoric occupation and colonial fortifications, making it a living timeline? Walk its terraces and you find lichen-silvered boulders, sun-warmed crevices where rock irex still call, and hardy succulents clinging to near-vertical faces. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and layered middens point to hunters and early farmers who used this promontory as lookout and refuge. From the highest outcrop the city unfurls, and your gaze links colonial traces on the kopje to green lungs like Mukuvisi woodlands and Harare botanical gardens. That visual thread connects a single outcrop to broader ecosystems, showing how this rock channels water, wildlife corridors, and settlement. Butterflies, small birds, and rare lichens exploit the kopje's microclimates, species assemblages found on only a few comparable granite domes worldwide. Conservationists say, protecting Salisbury kopje is not nostalgia, but stewardship of a biodiverse pocket that teaches dwellers about deep time and living nature. History layers here. Colonial stones and oral histories converge with prehistoric signs, each telling how people adapted to and shaped this rocky spine. Guides emphasize continuity, that following the kopje's ridgeline leads to nearby heritage spots, and in a broader sense, points south to Matobo and east to Great Zimbabwe. In this way, Salisbury kopje becomes a hinge between urban life and Zimbabwe's ancient landscapes, a classroom where geology, ecology, and human narrative meet. Exploring it reveals how one outcrop-oriented travelers sheltered communities and anchored a capital, while also pointing to the wild places beyond the city that hold deeper chapters. The Bubi Mountains hold one of Zimbabwe's handful of high-altitude cloud pockets where mist preserves relic Afromontane plants. Do you know that the Bubi Mountains shelter isolated montane forest patches and granite tors unknown to most travelers? Hidden springs feed streams which carve ravines and sustain wetlands below during dry months. Ancient granites and weathered sandstone form cliffs, plateaus, and fertile hollows that support diverse life. Birders come for highland species and rare butterflies that only appear at these cooler elevations. Botanists find orchids, protea relatives, and montane grasses that mark long-term climate refuges. Communities on the lower slopes keep ancient pathways and storytelling traditions tied to the land. Rock art and stone terraces tucked behind ridgelines show how people adapted to this high country. Importantly, the Bubi headwaters nourish rivers that link the highlands to distant savannas and floodplains. That means the mountains are a vital ecological piece for regions far downstream, not just an isolated ridge. Conservation here is fragile. Invasives, altered fire safety cycles, and shifting rains threaten small montane pockets. Local groups blend traditional knowledge with science to protect springs, seeds, and grazing practice. Hiking the ridges uncovers sudden vistas where cloud parts and sunlight spills over valleys. Each bend reveals why these slopes remained hidden and why their secrets matter to the rest of Zimbabwe. Next, we will follow those streams downwards to see how Bubi's waters sustain life beyond the rocks. But first, listen as local voices explain what the mountains mean to their identity and survival. Small-scale ecotourism initiatives are emerging, offering guided walks, birding hides, and homestay stays that bring income while protecting key habitats. Their success could determine whether the Bubi Mountains remain a secluded refuge or become a story of lost richness. Malilangwe Wildlife Reserve cradles one of the densest privately protected populations of black rhino in southern Africa. Do you know that Malilangwe shelters sandstone caves where rock paintings and ancient baobab groves tell a story older than modern borders? The reserve's rolling low-veld and hidden waterholes act like an oasis for sable, wild dog, and migratory birds that vanished elsewhere. Rangers here pioneered anti-poaching methods and community partnerships that quietly became a model across Zimbabwe's conservation landscape. At the heart of Malilangwe lies a large dam whose shimmering surface draws herds, crocodiles, and ephemeral swarms of dragonflies after summer rains. Night drives reveal jackal choruses and the rare sight of rhinos moving like silhouettes against the star-swept bush. Malilangwe's conservation success is woven into local livelihoods, with villages benefiting from tourism revenues and ranger training initiatives. Those same corridors of scrub and riverine forest link into larger wildlands, forming ecological bridges toward Gonarezhou and the Save River. Walks with guides uncover surprising biodiversity hotspots. Tiny frogs clinging to riverine roots and orchids hiding under termite mounds. You might be struck by the reserve's quiet claim to hosting one of the most intact examples of low-veld savanna left in the region. From Malilangwe, the story of Zimbabwe's wild places continues outward, each park passing wildlife like breath between lungs. Follow the spoor east, and you reach Gonarezhou's rugged gorges, where the landscape shifts, but the lifelines remain the same. Conservation here is forensic and patient, a decade-to-decade work of reintroductions, habitat restoration, and the slow rebuilding of predator-prey balance. And when you learn how Malilangwe's models informed neighboring reserves, the idea of isolated parks dissolves into a shared living network. In the end, Malilangwe is a quiet testament to what coordinated protection can do for species written off elsewhere. It is also a reminder that hidden wild places still hold surprises for those who look past the map. Waterfalls Falls in Zimbabwe is one of the few waterfalls that can almost disappear in the dry season and then re-emerge into a thunderous curtain after the rains. Do you know, Bridal Veil Falls sits just east of Victoria Falls and shares the same basalt amphitheater, while carving its own narrow channel and mist garden. Visitors who follow the thin path along the lip discover a different Victoria, a softer, more intimate cascade that reveals the cliff face beneath the water. Unlike the main fall's overwhelming roar, Bridal Veil offers moments of hush where spray turns cliff ledges into living tapestries of ferns and orchids. Those spray-drenched plants form tiny hanging forests that survive almost entirely on mist, creating microhabitats you won't find on the wider plateau. Birdlife exploits those niches, nesting in vertical crevices and darting through rainbows that form in the fall's constant fine spray. Geology here reads like a slow-motion movie. Basalt layers once molten, now sculpted into steps and chutes that direct the Zambezi's fury into delicate streams. As the river migrates upstream over millennia, it leaves behind a chain of cataracts, and Bridal Veil is a chapter in that long, restless story. Local guides point out scars where ancient flows once thundered and tell of how the falls have retreated, carving the dramatic Batoka Gorge downstream. The connection between Bridal Veil and the bigger Victoria Falls is visible in every plunge pool and every spray-wet ledge along the gorge. Photographers come at sunrise to catch translucent sheets of water lit from within, and scientists come to study how mosses colonize vertical cliffs. In the dry months, the veil thins to lace, exposing hidden caves and pools that attract both curious tourists and resilient wildlife alike. The more you study that shimmer, the more the falls reveal their role as guardians of a fragile edge where river meets wilderness. Few places teach you so plainly that a single seasonal change can rewrite landscapes and livelihoods along the Zambezi. So the next time a guide points toward that delicate curtain of water, remember, Bridal Veil is not just a pretty sideshow, but a key to understanding Victoria Falls and the entire river's history. What seems like a whisper of water is really a living archive, one that keeps surprising scientists, storytellers, and anyone who chooses to listen. The Great Zimbabwe Ruins are the largest dry stone masonry complex in sub-Saharan Africa, their walls rising from the Masvingo Plateau without a single nail or mortar. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries, the Great Enclosure and the Conical Tower still speak of an empire that controlled gold and ivory routes to the Indian Ocean. Walk among the curving passageways and you feel the precision of stones cut to fit so tightly they have weathered centuries with only tiny gaps. Archaeologists uncovered soapstone birds, beads, and imported ceramics here. Proof that this hilltop capital was plugged into trade networks reaching Kilwa and distant China. Those soapstone birds later became national icons, their image woven into flags and coins, turning ancient artistry into modern identity. But the stones also tell a story of contested history. Early colonial scholars denied local craftsmanship, while 20th century excavations re-centered African ingenuity. Today, UNESCO protects the site, yet visitors still confront the same questions the first excavators asked. Who lived here? How many? And why did the city decline? Recent studies suggest shifting trade patterns and environmental stress played a part, connecting Great Zimbabwe's fate to changes across southern Africa. From the high ramparts, the landscape unfurls toward Lake Mutarikwi and rolling savanna, a reminder that this capital was both political heart and agricultural hub. Paths that begin at the ruins lead outward, to the terraced fields below, to the fortress-like ruins of Kami further west, and onward to the Matobo Hills, where sacred sites continued the region's spiritual traditions. Standing in the Great Enclosure, you can almost map the invisible lines of trade. To Sofala's gold traders on the coast, and to inland communities who supplied cattle and grain. Visiting here is to witness how architecture becomes archive, how carved stone preserves memory when written records are scarcely pies. In the next chapter of our journey, we'll trace those caravan routes to the coast and explore how the riches that flowed through Great Zimbabwe shaped cities far beyond its walls. But right now, up on the plateau, the ancient walls stand as both question and answer, stubborn, beautiful, and deeply human. Bindura grasslands preserve one of Zimbabwe's last intact Miombo savanna mosaics, where ancient granite kopjes punctuate sweeping grass seas. Do you know that during the late dry season, the grasslands light up with fields of wild sunflowers and rare orchids that draw migrating pollinators from kilometers away? The land here breathes with seasonal rhythms, fires, rains, and elephant pathways that have shaped its soil for centuries. Birdsong is the grassland's constant, with raptors circling above, while secretive bustards and ground-hugging larks keep the floor alive. Local communities have long coexisted with this landscape, using traditional fire management and cattle grazing patterns that maintain biodiversity rather than erode it. You can trace ancient stone terraces and forgotten water ponds that hint at a human history as interwoven with the grass as it is with the trees. At dawn, the light reveals herds of impluso and zebra bending toward hidden springs, and if you listen closely, you might catch the distant trumpet of lone elephants. Many botanists who visit speak of the grassland's microhabitats, seasonal wetlands that host frogs and dragonflies unseen in nearby woodlands. Researchers are rediscovering insects and small mammals here that were once presumed rare, making Bindura a quietly pivotal place for conservation. Efforts to map wildlife corridors from the grasslands toward the nearby Mavura Donha foothills aim to reconnect fragmented populations. This living tapestry changes quickly. After a summer storm, the grass can double in height and within weeks become a blaze of seed heads and migrating birds. Photographers come specifically to capture the veiled mornings when mist threads through termite mounds and sunlight writes golden lines on the grass. But perhaps the most intimate way to know Bindura is by walking its animal trails at first light, following spoor that tells stories older than maps. Protecting this corridor matters because the animals that rely on it move seasonally toward the Mavura Donha and beyond, knitting Zimbabwe's wild places together. So as we leave the whispering grass behind, we carry not only its images, but the urgency of connecting habitats before they splinter for good. Mist clings to the slopes of the eastern highlands, where Zimbabwe's highest peaks cradle forgotten forests. Here, the Chimanimani and Nyanga ranges trade rugged ridgelines for carpeted valleys, rich with endemic plants. Walkers begin at Mount Nyangani, tracing streams that tumble into dramatic waterfalls and ancient potholes carved through basalt. From those lofty summits, the land falls away into the Honda Valley, an emerald basin threaded with rivers and mist-fed tea terraces. Mutare, the Highlands Gateway, still carries the colonial-era charm of stone buildings and shaded avenues. A short drive from town, the Vumba Mountains reveal sculpted gardens, rare orchids, and red duikers slipping between ferns. Local guides will point out endemic birds you won't easily find elsewhere, including the Swinnerton's robin and Chirinda apollos. In Chimanimani, granite towers rise like cathedral spires, and secret pools lie hidden beneath fern-lined cliffs. Hikers follow narrow paths from sheeted waterfalls to shimmering ridges where mist becomes an ever-present companion. In Nyanga, rolling grasslands give way to ancient rock art and farming communities that steward highland soils. Small trout streams and colonial-era dams capture light, reflecting an unexpected stillness amid the mountains. Local craftspeople weave stories into baskets and textiles that connect traditional practice with the land. Follow a ridge road from Nyanga toward Chimanimani, and the landscape subtly shifts from heathland to rainforest. Each change of vegetation tells a geological story that stretches back millions of years, written in stone and soil. eastern highlands demand slow travel, rewarding those who pause with hidden waterfalls, solitary peaks, and the quiet resilience of communities that call these heights home. Far from the mainstream, Zimbabwe harbors one of the world's largest inland sand river systems that nourishes an almost forgotten wildlife corridor. Do you know Sharara Safari Area shelters vast seasonal floodplains that swell with life, yet remain off most safari maps? Here, elephants migrate across open grasslands toward hidden lagoons where hippos vanish beneath sudden ripples. Lions prowl the acacia edges, and rare sable herds slip between termite mounds as if following an ancient script. Birdwatchers record over 370 species, including migratory rarities that defy the predictable charts of southern Africa. Flamingo flocks and Pell's fishing owls share the reed beds with secretive raptors that strike at dusk. Karara's mosaic of woodland, floodplain, and mopane provides uninterrupted sightings of animals behaving beyond the staged encounters of fenced reserves. It is this raw continuity, predator, prey, and water in an unbroken cycle, that makes Karara quietly essential. Local communities still read the seasons from the river's mood and maintain corridors that keep migrations alive. Conservation efforts here are less about monuments and more about negotiating coexistence on land people still treat as life's ledger. Walking with a guide, you can find spoor older than the conversation you are having, layered into the dust. At night, under a sky unpolluted by city glow, the calls of hyena and nightjars compose an intimate soundtrack. The charred remains of ancient baobabs mark long-term climate stories, while tiny pans collect rain like time capsules. Archaeological traces hint at human ties to this landscape stretching back millennia, yet the place refuses to be tamed. Travelers who detour here exchange spectacle for depth, trading checklist ticks for the slow revelations of place. By following Sharara's rivers toward the Zambezi escarpment, you trace a living artery that connects to greater conservation narratives across Zimbabwe. Seasonal floods redraw boundaries, turning dry tracks into mirror-like sheets where reflections double the wilderness drama. Photographers can spend days capturing the same scene as it morphs from golden dawn to storm-dark intensity. But Sharara's real gift is unpredictability. You never know whether a solitary wild dog will become the uncooling story of your morning. And it is precisely that unpredictability that draws scientists, storytellers, and quiet pilgrims seeking land that still tells its own tales. Visiting Kerala is less about ticking landmarks and more about learning to read the subtle grammar of survival written across its plains. Stay a while, and the place will teach you patience, humility, and an intimate knowledge of how water shapes fate. Vumba Botanical Gardens protect one of the last pockets of montane cloud forest in southern Africa, a mist-wrapped refuge where ferns and ancient trees create a living cathedral. Do you know Vumba Botanical Gardens shelters the Swinnerton's robin and several endemic orchids found nowhere else on Earth? Walk its winding paths and you'll find rhododendrons planted a century ago beside indigenous proteas, a strange marriage of introduced and native. Small stone walls and colonial greenhouses whisper of botanists who mapped every leaf. And today volunteers tend experimental collections linked to research stations in Mutare. The garden's elevation means seasons slide into one another, with cool mornings giving way to sudden cloud banks that spill over into the valleys of the Vumba Mountains. From here, trails drop down toward the Zimbabwean tea plantations and the quiet village of Troutbeck, making Vumba a hinge between cultivated landscapes and wild highland forests. Look closely, and you may spot tiny sunbirds probing trumpet-shaped flowers or the flash of a rare butterfly that has adapted to the mist economy of this plateau. Botanical collectors have recorded dozens of species here that serve as living libraries, seeds and cuttings, sometimes ferried to herbaria and gardens across Africa and Europe. The gardens also act as an ecological corridor, linking fragmented patches of forest toward the Chimanimani range, where larger mammals and high-altitude plants continue the chain. Every path, bench, and specimen bed is a lesson in resilience, showing how careful stewardship can stitch back together habitats once carved by colonial agriculture. As the sun sinks, clouds lower, and the valley fills with a hush, as if the landscape is holding its breath. That hush invites you to follow the ridge toward other highland treasures, because Vumba is the opening chapter of the Eastern Highlands' living story. Gonarezhou National Park in Zimbabwe holds one of the largest undisturbed sandstone escarpments in southern Africa. Its crimson Chilosho cliffs rising like an ancient cathedral above wide, wild plains. Do you know Gonarezhou's name means place of elephants, and that some herds here follow migratory routes, older than the park itself, tracing pathways carved over millennia? Shadows shift across the cliffs and reveal pockets of vegetation that host endemic insects and plants found nowhere else on the continent. The park's mosaic of mopane woodland, jagged ridges and seasonal pans creates one of the most resilient drought-land ecosystems in Zimbabwe. Elephants reshape the landscape here, splitting trees and opening corridors that in turn feed grasslands relied upon by zebra and buffalo. During the dry season, riverbeds like the Runde pulse with life as waterholes concentrate wildlife into dramatic, intimate encounters. Gonarezhou's isolation until recent decades preserved ancient rock art and termite mounds that have become archives of ecological history. Rangers and researchers now map those records to understand climate shifts and to connect conservation efforts across borders. This is why Gonarezhou is critical to the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, serving as a bridge between Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa's Kruger National Park. Conservation corridors here are not lines on maps, but living pathways that allow genetic exchange and seasonal movement across vast landscapes. Visit Gonarezhou, and you don't just see wildlife. You see the force of geological time etched into cliffs, the persistence of species, and people who have adapted with both. In the next section, we'll follow one elephant clan from the Kiloho Cliffs toward the floodplain and trace its journey to neighboring reserves that keep Zimbabwe's wild heart beating. Bindura grasslands preserve one of Zimbabwe's last intact Miombo savanna mosaics, where ancient granite kopjes punctuate sweeping grass seas. Do you know that during the late dry season, the grasslands light up with fields of wild sunflowers and rare orchids that draw migrating pollinators from kilometers away? The land here breathes with seasonal rhythms, fires, rains, and elephant pathways that have shaped its soil for centuries. Birdsong is the grassland's constant, with raptors circling above, while secretive bustards and ground-hugging larks keep the floor alive. Local communities have long coexisted with this landscape, using traditional fire management and cattle grazing patterns that maintain biodiversity rather than erode it. You can trace ancient stone terraces and forgotten water ponds that hint at a human history as interwoven with the grass as it is with the trees. At dawn, the light reveals herds of implusso and zebra bending toward hidden springs, and if you listen closely, you might catch the distant trumpet of lone elephants. Many botanists who visit speak of the grasslands microhabitats, seasonal wetlands that host frogs and dragonflies unseen in nearby woodlands. Researchers are rediscovering insects and small mammals here that were once presumed rare, making Bindura a quietly pivotal place for conservation. Efforts to map wildlife corridors from the grasslands toward the nearby Mavura-Donha foothills aim to reconnect fragmented populations. This living tapestry changes quickly. After a summer storm, the grass can double in height and within weeks become a blaze of seed heads and migrating birds. Photographers come specifically to capture the veiled mornings when mist threads through termite mounds and sunlight writes golden lines on the grass. But perhaps the most intimate way to know Bindura is by walking its animal trails at first light, following spoor that tells stories older than maps. Protecting this corridor matters because the animals that rely on it move seasonally toward the Mavura-Donha and beyond, knitting Zimbabwe's wild places together. So as we leave the whispering grass behind, we carry not only its images, but the urgency of connecting habitats before they splinter for good. From the thunder of Victoria Falls to the glassy expanse of Lake Kariba, Zimbabwe threads together landscapes few other countries can claim. Its sandstone ridges at the Matobo Hills cradle ancient rock art, while the remnants of Great Zimbabwe speak of a kingdom that once stretched beyond imagination. Across Hwange's salt pans, elephants form slow-moving kingdoms, and in mana pools, hippos and wild dogs sketch daily dramas along the Zambezi's floodplain. Travel east into the misted slopes of the eastern highlands, and you'll find fern-clad valleys and peaks that host unique species found nowhere else on the planet. There are places where history and geology meet so closely that one can read human stories in stone and see ancestral trade routes mirrored by river currents. Great Zimbabwe's stone towers point to skills that defied their era and connect almost invisibly to the tribal stories of Matabele and Shona communities still singing the land. Beyond the iconic sites, unexpected wonders wait. Subterranean limestone caves, flaming seasonal pans that bloom with migratory birds, and baobabs so enormous they hold whole family histories in their hollows. Even the Zambese's quieter stretches hide braided channels that turn into islands teeming with life when the floods recede, revealing a choreography of survival and rebirth. To leave Zimbabwe only with memories of the falls or a safari would be to miss the quieter conversations, the late-night storytelling in village homesteads, the artisanal craftsmen shaping soapstone, and the murmured conservation efforts redefining coexistence. Those human threads bind the parks and peaks into a living tapestry where conservationists, elders, and youths all have stakes in what the future will hold. If you come seeking drama, you will find it. But if you stay to listen, Zimbabwe rewards patience with secrets that slowly reveal themselves. Rock paintings that map ancient constellations, seasonal fish migrations that sustain whole communities, and landscapes that remember. Carry these stories home, not as postcards, but as invitations to look deeper. Because the most remarkable thing about Zimbabwe is that every path you take opens onto another mystery. So step away from the obvious, follow the rivers, climb the ridges, and let the country show you the quiet places where history and life continue to surprise. This is not an end, but an invitation to return, to learn, and to keep discovering.